Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. My name is Stephen Norris, and I'm the Walter E. Havighurst Professor of Russian History at Miami University in Ohio, and also the Director of the Havighurst Center for Russian and Post-Soviet Studies here. This is the first event in our Focus on Ukraine series, as well as the first event of the fall in our ongoing Creative Horizons collaboration. Creative Horizons is an ongoing collaboration with Arizona State University's Melikian Center and the University of South Florida's Institute for Russia, European, and Eurasian Studies, one that spotlights art and artists in the former Soviet world. The series so far has featured Victoria Lamasko, Vladimir Siesler, Shabolis Kispal, Yermina Takinova, Katerina Babkina, and Alyssa Loshkina. Today we're joined and are happy to be joined by Yevgenia Belorusets. She is a Ukrainian writer, artist, and photographer who lives between Kiev and Berlin. She's the author of what the Washington Post called an unsettling and illuminating collection of stories, Lucky Breaks, recently published in English, and the cycle of lectures, Modern Animal. Her photographic work has been shown at the Ukrainian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2015 and again this year. She's a member of the Hudrada Curatorial Collective and co-founder of Pro Story, a journal for literature, art, and politics. Yevgenia is joining us live from Berlin today. Thank you for joining us, Yevgenia. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So let me begin, of course, with the war. Russia's war on Ukraine has dominated the headlines this year. And of course, the Ukrainian successes over the weekend have provided some hope, but also reminded us that the war continues. In fact, just this morning, NPR here in the United States featured Ukrainians who had lived in the occupied regions recently liberated by Ukrainian armies, telling their stories on the radio of the Russian invasion and the behavior of Russian troops. So let me begin by asking you, can you recount your own experiences on February 24th of this year and the immediate days after the invasion when you were still in Kiev? And when and why did you decide to leave Kiev?
Thank you for the question. It was a very special day, actually a day, one of the longest days of this war, with incredibly long start of the day. Actually, it began like most of the days. I woke up, I worked late previous evening. I think I even had a Zoom with a German university, Humboldt University from Berlin, and was asked what they think about the war will start, what might happen, and I was sure. I was speaking with professor. We created projects together, and I was sure war will not start. I said it's impossible, because it's not in the interests of Russia to start such a horrible and very crazy and irrational war. So it will not happen, I'm quite sure. And she was very happy about my answer. We all were kind of on edge that days, but I was happy about my answer too, and went to bed, I think, with a feeling of my own, believing in my own word, believing in something that I have said. And in the morning, I woke up. When I woke up, after a while, I looked at my mobile phone, and saw lots of unanswered calls, different calls from different people, from my parents, of course, but relatives, but also friends. And it looked very strange, because people trying to reach me from the very early in the morning, from maybe 6 or even 5 o'clock in the morning till 8, 9, different people. And when I saw these calls, I started to imagine connections between these people and couldn't find any clue. I thought if something crazy, awful happened in my family, these friends might not know about that. How they could know about that? And if it happened to my friends, such friends, maybe my parents would know about that. So I couldn't connect all these people, and had a very strange feeling about death, sudden death of a person I love. but I couldn't imagine war, even at that moment. So I called my cousin, and she's practically said to me several words. War started, Kiev is under attack. And then we said goodbye to each other. And then I completely knew, I couldn't, actually she said it to me, but I think I still had to have some time just to understand that it is really happening. I, of course, started reading news. You must understand that I am, my origin is a culture, Kiev culture, Kiev intellectual culture, which is very much connected to different forms of memorization of the Second World War. And the words never again were actually, war never again, were one of the most repeated in my childhood through my grandparents. I am also Jewish origin, so it was especially important, but not also because of that. The whole country, Ukraine, was a country that was denying and very much it was a country, the whole atmosphere through all the years of my youth and being an adult person were connected to this idea that Ukraine doesn't want war, doesn't want to participate in any war, and it should not happen again. I think collective memories of the Second World War, which very much included Ukraine, and we can recall the Timothy Snyder book, Bloodlands, where just a common idea that what the society doesn't want to happen. And it was very strange to understand that it's really going on now, that we couldn't make a choice for that not to happen. It was happening with us. It was not our choice, not a collective choice, and it is still happening. It was very strange to acknowledge that.
And one of the choices you made after the initial shock was to begin a diary on that day, on February 24th, and also start taking photographs, which we're seeing on our screens, cycling through here. And collectively, the photographs in the diary chronicled eventually the first 40 days of the war up till April 4th. In it, in the first entry, you note that you wrote each entry as if it would be the last one. You wanted to provide specific experiences from the ground. And as a historian, it interests me very much that you were conscious of documenting your own feelings for posterity from the outset. So looking back on this diary, what stands out to you about it and your experiences? And maybe more specifically, one of the central questions you ask throughout the diary is how you remain an artist at a time of war. So what answers did you come up with? How do you remain an artist at a time of war like this?
Maybe I will just say to you that I doesn't remain an artist. I wasn't understanding myself as an artist in that moment. I was invited by German magazine Spiegel to write an analytical article, maybe about what is happening at the first day. And at that day, I was quite sure that even so, it is happening now, full-scale invasion, new wave of invasion, because the war lasted since 2014, but it wasn't anything like that. I was invited to write something for them, and even I could write in my native language and they would translate it maybe, but then we exchanged during the day what it could be, what the text could be, and the editor of Spiegel proposed to me just to start writing in German and to write my impressions of what is going on. I was sure that war like that cannot last more than several days, and I thought, and that day was so long in my impression of the day, because in this first day happened different phases of the war happened. till 1 o'clock at the day, everything in the city was functioning as usual. And after this, after 12 or 1 p.m., all the shops, cafes, everything was getting closed before my eyes. So I saw like the whole city was getting closed, and not just doors were closed, but lots of places were closed like for years, with some elements to protect windows from theoretical attack, bullets and explosions, closed. And they not just looked closed, but they looked abandoned, like within several hours. And the city was changing so quickly at that day and so intensively that I thought actually about one text in the morning. Then when I saw this process of changing, I wrote another text in my head. And then in the evening, when I got any moments to write, because we were visiting the places, shelters to hide from explosions at that day, and looking for places when we could hide. Some of my friends and my parents who are not so young, so they needed maybe more comfort. And the whole day was, I couldn't find really a moment to write, but I was constantly thinking, what should I tell? And in the evening, it was again a completely different text that I started writing. And when I was writing in German, this first text, I actually suddenly understood that it is a huge freedom to write not in your native language, to create, to gain some distance from events through the language and through the energy you invest just in formulate anything in a language that doesn't belong to you entirely. And I started writing and wrote this first entry, but I doesn't think that my goal was to remain an artist at that moment. I think I wanted to become a witness, not only somebody who is under the pressure of circumstances, just living through the circumstances, but somebody who through different instrument of a distance is witnessing about these circumstances immediately. To someone who could, I was appealing to international audience. My idea was to write not to people who are around me, because I didn't want to discuss what I was thinking with them immediately, or not directly, because I thought that most of my friends were taking actions, trying to create a space for them to survive, because nobody was aware what will happen to Kiev. Actually, some of people were sure nothing will happen. It was I was kind of, I don't know why I was sure about that, but lots of experts predicted, and I think this possibility remained, that Kiev would lose the only one way through Zhytomyr that remained, that was connecting Kiev to the central Ukraine, to other parts of Ukraine, and where Kiev was getting all deliveries. So Kiev could easily stay for a long time without any necessary supplies for such a big city, and without water, without electricity. We know that Russia was constantly attacking and now attacks civilian infrastructure. And from the first, and lots of people, my friends, they were leaving one after another, were leaving the city, especially friends with small kids. And yeah, so for me, staying in the city and creating photographical series, meeting people, and writing was actually, yeah, I think yeah, again, not an art, but as I saw it at that moment, not an art, but just a method to remain a citizen.
It's interesting, in the last entry from April, you mentioned that you almost become a hostage to your diary, and this situation of becoming a witness, as you described. So can you explain why you thought that way and why you ended it the way you did?
Hostage. Maybe it was so important for me to write that I decided it is very, it's not easy to answer that question because my father felt not well. Medicine doesn't function in the city, and we had and my cousin and parts of my family needed me being there for them to leave. So we decided to leave Kiev several times, and I was buying tickets for all of us, but then we decided in the last moment to stay. Not only because I was writing, of course, but because my parents didn't want to leave Kiev. Other parts of families then decided not to leave. And it was changing constantly. During this time in Kiev, I was not sure when I will stay, when I will leave the city. It was constantly, it wasn't stable. But also, strangely, I got very, at the end, I got very tired, exhausted of writing because my writing was very much connected to the idea fix, maybe that the war will stop and my last entry will be the last moment of that war. And it wasn't happening. Not only that, war became a form of life. War became a huge different reality that was spread like an air everywhere. And yeah, and I just I think I needed a possibility to escape this writing at the end, because I don't know, I need a distance from this kind of describing every day after another of ongoing, practically genocide of my own country.
So the diary, and one of the reasons I'm focusing on it is it's become such a central text for those of us living outside of Ukraine for understanding this war. It's really resonated with people. The translations are appearing, including a full English one, which will appear in the next several months. And it was also featured prominently at the Ukrainian pavilion at this year's Venice Biennale, where visitors sat at a desk, could read an entry from the diary and look at your photographs, which we're seeing. We've also seen photographs cycling through here of your version of the diary and photographs at the Venice Biennale. So what was the reaction that you've heard about the use of the diary at the pavilion, and how did you envision this installation? I'm quite curious about what entries you chose or were chosen and what photographs were chosen to accompany each entry at the exhibit.
For me, it was very important to show how one day of this diary is this central idea of this text. It's not actually the full text, but one day in the situation of catastrophe, in the situation when you don't know if you will wake up next morning, in a completely different state of life. And when I was invited to exhibit this diary, I was happy because I thought it is actually a moment when I can stop writing. I was looking for that because Kiev was not belagert in German. He was not surrounded by Russian troops anymore. On the 2nd of April, practically it was the first time when Ukraine managed to defend a big part of the country and to stop Russian invasion from the taking of Kiev and the central part of Ukraine. So this special situation in Kiev stopped, and normal life came back step after step. And we discovered a completely different side of this war, new side of this war, crimes of Bucha, Irpin, and other small cities around Kiev. And for me, it was also a big shock, which I was trying to describe in my last entries, or if I couldn't do it, I at least tried to show it in my last photographs. And then I thought, when Kiev is actually now the city that is you can for guarantee come back and live it, I also am now allowed to actually finish this part of this work and communicate the situation of the city when it is at such a risk. I couldn't even believe that I was going through all of that, this endless nights without sleep. I was not sleeping for weeks properly, not even one night, because it was you can hear in your apartment explosions, then sirens were coming and going, and there were practically no sleep for weeks for me in the part of Kiev where I was living. At least that was like that. And I decided to show this diary. Actually, for me, I even didn't know at that moment if I'm stopping writing. Maybe I will start writing again systematically, or I will just end it, make a last point and end it at that moment. But my idea, and you see it on this photograph, was to show one day, to show one day in one small space. In this case, a table became the space, and this table is repeating actually the sizes of one of my working tables in my apartment, and to give the visitor the idea of course you cannot show what it's like to live and to survive under these circumstances. Also, I think there are lots of different experiences even within one city, and every city in Ukraine has a different biography in this war. But yeah, I still was sure, and it was important to emphasize this one fragment of life that suddenly got a completely different meaning in other circumstances.
It's a good segue to my next question. That is the idea that every city in Ukraine has its own biography in this war, in part because your photography has documented the war from its beginning in 2014, when Russian forces occupied Crimea and the subsequent separatist war backed by the Russian government in the Donbass. You traveled to these regions. They became the basis of your collection of short stories, Lucky Breaks. You visited war zones. You listened to people tell stories. So how did those affect your short stories? And what short stories are real, with quotes around it, I suppose, that is based on actual stories? And how did you alter them for the purposes of your fiction? Which is a way of asking the genesis of this, the Lucky Breaks, your turn toward short story writing.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I went to Donbass in 2014, and actually I went, I decided to go there because war for me was not understandable. What is it? And I was very much angry with propaganda that developed largely developed around Maidan revolution from the Russian side, interpreting Maidan, and then around the war and the first stage of Russian invasion in the Donbas. And I was angry not only with Russia, but also with Ukraine, with Ukrainian vision of Donbas that was also not really its own vision, but more a response to a Russian propaganda, which was presenting eastern parts of Ukraine as pro-Russian, pro-Soviet, nostalgic parts of Ukraine that doesn't want to belong to Ukraine anymore, and therefore they are ready to fight Ukrainian illegal government. And Ukraine pictured people from eastern regions as potential betrayers and as people who sentiment an awful Soviet period, awful state. That means that people might also be kind of awful. And not understanding what is freedom, not understanding what the values of human rights. And I knew that it is not true because I was always interested in workers' movement, maybe interested in leftist thinking and theory and leftist theories all my life. And I knew that workers' movement in Donbas in eastern Ukraine was very important for Ukrainian independence, that there were a lot of protests at the end, last years of Soviet era and at the beginning, last years of Soviet era, close to the 90s, huge protest movements in Donbas, and which were very important and crucial for the whole political ideas in that region, and that workers supported independence of Ukraine and actually voted, more than 90% of them voted for the independence in Ukraine during the national referendum, big votes where the independence was actually discussed and decided in the whole countries. So I couldn't believe, and I was ashamed that I knew this region so bad, this part of my own country, and I decided to go there. And I was connected to a trade union activist, and we traveled. I cooperated with one of the trade union activists who actually stayed part of the time in the under Russia controlled city of Ukraine, and then he managed to leave, and we decided to go to visit cities on Ukrainian part, but close to the war zone, on the edge of the war zone in Donbas, and we were traveling together, and it was actually a big discovery for me. It was I discovered a very interesting Ukrainian region with its own tradition, and also I discovered that people were managing at that very strange war that Russia started with Ukraine, even to protect their own cities from the war, through proceeding their war, through not letting Russia soldiers and agitators to invade mines and to destroy mines, which would make thousands of people, practically of men, thousands of men otherwise would just get no work anymore, and would be able to join some paramilitary groups. And I discovered self-organization of many cities like Lysychansk, for instance, which was occupied, and I hope is in the process of getting freed right now. So the people from these areas were just not letting Russia to invade their minds, and they could proceed working, even not getting any salaries for the time when it was occupied. So I discovered the occupation and how war started and what happened to people. And I created a series of photographs that is called Victories of the Defeated. And then after I worked on a big exhibition in Kiev, trying to change the idea of what this Eastern Ukraine actually is, I thought that lots of elements of what I discovered is still not there, not in the exhibition, not in the text that accompanied the exhibition, and I started writing and wrote that book. You know, you were during our conversation, you are showing photographs, and suddenly I would love to comment some of them, but maybe during your next question I will interrupt what I'm saying. Like on this photograph, what you are seeing right now, it's actually the end of my time in Kiev. It is, I think, the end of March, and you see people who are in the central part of Kiev. They are they're visiting the one of many stores that are open now, and you can grocery stores and just other stores when you can buy food in the center of Kiev, and they are during, maybe it is daytime, 1 o'clock or 2 p.m. And when they visited this store, the sirens just announced that Kiev might be under fire, and they don't know what to do. They decided to leave the store, but they stay in between this very dangerous, actually, in the case of explosion, glass elements. They're not living for hours. They're just spending time in there, almost outside, waiting that the signal will come that it is not dangerous and they can go home and just go through the streets. And it is very strange when you cannot plan anything for your day, because anywhere when you are, you can start hearing sirens or even explosions, and then you have to hide somewhere. So people were not planning long walks for a very, very long time in Kiev. They were just trying, most of people, not all of course, but they were trying not to move far away from home and not to go shopping.
I raised my eyebrow when you said something about interrupting with photographs, because my next question, the last one I'll ask before we take some audience questions, is about your photography. And specifically, what has struck me looking at your photographs is how little text you include with them, very little identification. It's kind of up to the viewer to determine what they are, how they fit into the subject of whatever photographic work you're documenting. And how in Lucky Breaks, they often come without any identification, and they therefore bleed the line along with the stories between fiction and reality. And you've even said that every document is partly a lie. And this is especially true of documentary photography, which only ever conveys a small part of reality. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on this, and also maybe speak to whether or not there's a danger in mixing the real and unreal and truth and fiction?
I don't think it is a danger. Maybe danger is, maybe danger is this absence of critical thinking and ability to decide. Ability to look critically through the text and images that we are seeing. I think, I think that in the book Lucky Breaks, you can see two photographic series. One was taken in Kiev, and it is called War in Park. And it was connected to my travel to Donbass. I traveled to Donbass and came back to Kiev and brought war with me. I imagined war everywhere. I couldn't understand how Kiev could proceed living, creating very often on the streets, in the parks and other places in the city, a feeling that it's no war going on in the country. And the war I have seen, the kind of war I have experienced in Donbass, the atmosphere, I was constantly feeling that it is like an additional weight that is following me and making my steps heavier. And I decided to see through the lens of a camera if I can find the war in the places where it is definitely not happening, in the parks of Kiev where people are relaxing. And I was photographing parks in the central part of Kiev with this thought and with this idea of the war in a different region of the country. And then I decided and discovered that it actually can be that reality photography, documentary photography. Of course, it was always that I always believed in it, but then during this project, I even more I was practically discussing it with myself and with viewers, how your imagination is creating reality, is projecting reality when you are studying it with photography that claims to be objective, because you cannot control everything that is happening on the street when you are photographing. Of course, lots of elements of reality that you cannot control and that is not fitting your image of it are making its way into the image and showing itself on the photograph, or on every photograph. So I was looking for that, and it was all my stories actually in that book and this series are about a conflict of different reality, of realities that we are imagining for ourselves or creating for ourselves, and realities that are interacting or maybe destroying them. When society is undergoing a big catastrophe or a big change, and you want not to see it, but still exist in it, it's happening, for instance. And I think Ukrainian society was so much hating the war and didn't want war to happen with them that lots of people, especially in the eastern Ukraine, created and felt for different irrational or mythological explanation of a violence that they are witnessing. But also imagination and ironical thinking, I think, and creative thinking helps to deal with violence if you have no choice but just to go through it.
Let me turn to, so thank you very much. There's some questions from the audience already in the chat, and I'll also.
I know that was not the direct answer to a question, but it is just, I was just trying to, speak on different.
No, it was a very good answer. Let me ask people, if you do want to ask a question, pose it in the chat, and I'll turn to the first couple that have been posted to ask, do you think a lot of Ukrainians thought like you did at the beginning of the war and believed that it would end at some point in the first few months? How indicative of the rest of the people you talked to was your own thinking about the beginning of the war? Did everyone pretty much think it would be over very soon?
Okay, I'm not reading the chat, you will read it for me. So the question is if a lot of people were thinking that it will end soon. Yes. I think Yeah. I wish my English would be better and I could express more, but I think that if you are in the situation you cannot control in such a large scale, then actually magical thinking is a lot in a game, what I have seen in my society. So you can only imagine the end of the war. You cannot be sure. You don't know about the future. You cannot read the future, of course. No, nobody can. And all the experts also cannot. So you can find any voice you want. You can find a voice that will tell a war will end in 2 or 3 weeks, in 2 or 3 days, or in 2 or 3 years, or in 2 or 3 decades. And it is still today like that. So you cannot actually, in the situation of such a war, you cannot make any real plans because you don't have answers to a very important question, what your life will be like in a short period of time. Of course, every living person don't know its future, but in the war, even if your city is not in danger, which is interesting because lots of cities of Ukraine, Western Ukraine, also now central Ukraine, the capital of Ukraine, are kind of protected from Russian attacks and are not under attack constantly, but still people who are living in these areas, they are in a completely different situation than any European or any American. We and also me when I'm there, they really don't know what will happen next, and they can make, if they are realistic, only a short term, they can plan only short term, anything, business or what they will, the occupation, plans for children, for older people, for themselves, all the plans. And they think that within this short-term reality that it is only you have is short-term planning, you are trying to include in this short-term planning most important elements of what you want that will happen. And I think that for me, and not only me, but lots of people were thinking at the beginning of the war that it will end soon, naturally, because you are in the situation when you can only plan for 2 weeks forward, and even that not so easy. So you were hoping, everybody was hoping that it will end soon. Besides, it was such a huge crime and such a huge break of all international laws that actually I was sure that international community will find the way to stop Putin, because it was like a completely different new era starting just
you paused for a second there.
It was like a punch in the face of the whole world, and that would we just look at it to happen and to proceed. I couldn't believe in that at that moment. But now I think everything is depending on the international support of Ukraine with weapons in the first place, but also economical support that will help Ukraine to survive. And the fall of Russian Putinist regime will mark the end of this violence and of this war. I don't think that Putin can leave and not stay a president and not investing in this project, the project of him. project of destroying Ukraine or recreating this imperium he imagined where Ukraine is a very important part of it.
So the second question from the audience member, and the reason I've paused on this photograph is essentially to explain this photograph. Who is this young woman in this colored jacket who may appear in other photographs? The audience member is asking, and this seems like the most artistic photograph of the bunch. Was this an installation that she described, or that she made, or that you helped make? So tell us a little bit more about this one.
Yeah, no, I was not helping to do anything in this photographic series. I was really observing. This young woman is Ukrainian designer who stayed in Kiev during this siege of Kiev, this very dangerous time. And I met her by coincidence because she lived not so far away from me. I met her on the street and she told me that she has having a nervous breakdown. And during this moment, and in these moments, in these sleepless nights, she is constantly connecting yellow and blue, just plastic elements to each other and making different clothing parts out of them and masks. And she doesn't even understand what she is doing at that moment. And I proposed her that I will meet her and just document it. Actually, she is a very interesting, author and designer, and I thought that it's also a part of this time. And actually, this photograph, yes, it looks like the most staged, but it was also kind of staged. We met in the middle between our houses, and when I was photographing her, people around us were wondering why we are doing that during such a dangerous time in the war. And some of people were even saying to me that they will call police or Ukrainian military defense groups because they've seen camera in my hands and such a strange interaction with a person. And I was constantly showing my accreditation and license to make photographs in Kiev on the streets.
So the next question comes from a student who mentions that one of his Ukrainian friends has recently moved to the Czech Republic to get her master's, and that, of course, she's one of many Ukrainians now living abroad, and many living abroad since February 24th. And the question is, do you think that these Ukrainians that live abroad now feel a deeper connection to Ukraine? And if so, do you think that connection will last after Ukraine's victory?
I don't know how many Ukrainians went abroad because houses were destroyed completely, or they don't have a place to go back because they're coming from Mariupol or from other cities that were occupied, partly destroyed, or are still occupied by Russia. Or another reason, they cannot leave, not everybody can stay and just live within the situation of constant threat, surviving sirens and this feeling of danger. And people are leaving Ukraine, but lots of them are planning to come back when the war will end, or when it will become less dangerous, and as they are still coming back. I don't think that right now, when the situation is actually so much changing, and everyday news are so important for lots of Ukrainians, they are disconnected from their country. Even though they are in other countries, they are constantly on the news channels, speaking with their friends that are in Ukraine and trying to do what they can, even abroad, through protest actions and different, just sending money to support Ukraine and do what they can. I am speaking not about everybody, but about lots of communities and people there abroad that I have met or have seen.
So I have another question from a student to ask about whether or not there are any particular myths or misconceptions that you feel need to be corrected about how the world is perceiving the war in Ukraine.
Lots of them, because it is also informational war, as you maybe know, and maybe the most important idea is that Russia is very dangerous, and we should find a way to make peace with Russia, because the war with Russia is dangerous for the whole world, and Ukraine cannot win because nobody can win over such a superpower. That is one of the very dangerous, one of the many lies and dangerous myths that are spread to make it impossible to solidarize with Ukraine and to weaken solidarity and powers that are stopping this crime.
So a related question, students in a class that's attending today on Monday heard a very good lecture about the role of religion in the war and how the Orthodox Church and religion in general is being weaponized in this war, especially by the Russians to extend their dominance over Ukraine. So what's your sense of how Ukrainians are understanding religion now and using it to understand their own experiences at war?
I think Ukraine is more religious country than Russia, actually, and Russian Orthodox Church was very represented in Ukraine. But you think if it is a church that was connected to Moscow, it is also controlled by Moscow, but it is not true. I think democratic and also anarchic Ukrainian tradition formed this church much more, this connection. And when the war started, Ukrainian Moscow church became independent from Moscow, trying to just cut all the big ties with the capital of Russia. And actually I have heard from different of my friends good experiences even with this church. I'm not speaking about Ukrainian church. What church was doing during the war, and what I have seen with my own eyes in Kiev, I can tell you what I have seen, that Ukrainian church, but like also so-called ex-Moscow church, Orthodox church, both churches were supporting citizens of Kiev, creating places where they can hide and live, opening their doors for Ukrainian military to train, for military doctors to have their own master classes and trainings in the churches, with the hope that the church might not be attacked. Church actually was not ignoring the war and cooperated a lot with citizens in Kiev to support them. And that's true. And not only about Ukrainian so-called Orthodox Church, but also the church that was connected to Moscow Orthodox.
So we probably have time for one more question, and there's a good one in the chat from a colleague at Arizona State University. She says, Yevgenia, thank you very much for coming to speak with us and for your incredibly moving and brave work. You've begun framing for us a catastrophic traumatic event that we're all still processing. And she wonders if you could speak about the types of support that's helpful for Ukrainians in this difficult time, and what would you like to see happen more in Western universities and cultural institutions? How can we help, in other words?
Thank you very much for inviting me again, and for this interesting conversation and deep questions. I think actually all the processes that are happening now are, I like all the tendencies I'm seeing. So Western institutions are discovering Ukraine and giving voice to people from Ukraine. What is important right now, I think, it's really to hear different voices and gather experiences, because it's a huge tragedy for lots of Ukrainians. And what is important is, I think, to be heard and actually to gather as more to create space for voices and for witnesses of this crime, and then we can have a hope that we really will create a new reality when where this what was happening is not possible.
Let me say to audience members, for those who haven't looked at Yevgenia's photographs yet, or read any of her stories, or read her diary, that a simple Google search, Yevgenia Belorusets, will turn up all of these sources, including her own homepage, where all of her photographic works are displayed. Of course, Lucky Breaks is well worth the read. Thank you so much, Yevgenia. We've learned so much from you today. We continue to learn so much from you. We appreciate your time.
It was nice seeing you, and questions were interesting. Thank you.